Hello, everybody. Happy fall. Welcome back to OTT Executive Podcast. I'm Brian Mahoney, your host, the CEO of Trend Research and the president of the growing OTT executive community. I just want to do a shout out to our friends at IBC. I'm not going this year. As you know, I go to a bunch of shows and I speak and I moderate. That's just not on the radar screen this year. So I'll catch you all next year in Amsterdam. Hope you all have a safe and wonderful show. Another heads up, in 2 weeks, I'll be moderating the Stream TV Ad Summit. Highly recommend you tune in. It's a virtual summit, so no excuses. I think it's noon or 1 o'clock 2 weeks from now. And I have a very prestigious panel. We'll be talking about the trends and things that are happening with ad technology, particularly related to streaming, but also convergence of streaming and linear and digital. So it'll be really, really good conversation. Please tune into that, and I'll put a link in the comments. So I'm very excited about today's session. Esther who is the head of user experience for YouTube TV and Primetime channels. Esther, we bumped into each other. I was moderating a panel at Stream TV in Denver back in June, not the beginning of the summer. And now we're back doing a podcast, and I'm really grateful for your time today. Welcome, everybody. Esther.
Thanks, Brian. I'm glad to be here.
That's awesome. So listen, as you know, our vibe for this podcast is to personalize some of the luminaries of the industry, get to know a little bit about your career path and your current role in the company, and kind of go into trends, learn from you, really, sort of on an individual basis. And so let's start with that, if you don't mind, Esther, is just your career background. How did you get to where you are today?
Yeah, great. Thanks so much. I run user experience, but my career was always in, I would say, design and the creative field. But it's gone through some different pivots, and it's been a sort of interesting journey to get to where I am at right now at YouTube. But I started out initially doing architecture. Actually, that was my thing, right? So it was really thinking about design for physical spaces. And with that, it was thinking about how people use spaces, and really started my initial thing. This was sort of early on. And then I ended up sort of working at a pretty interesting place called Smart Design, which was an industrial design firm. And, they were really sort of rethinking how beautiful objects are made. Everything from common household objects. There's a brand called OXO, but it was thinking about form and function. And so they were sort of reimagining, why a can opener needs to look like that. And just thinking about how we could really design for different people's needs. And a lot of it was based on ergonomics. So this is really prior to UX, interaction design, UI design, all like coming to fruition.
I love it. But so beautiful objects. What do you mean by beautiful objects?
Yeah, beautiful object. I mean, when I think about sort of a let's talk about a can opener. The original can opener. Do you remember back in the day where there was just like this really sterling? It was a metal, silver.
I still have one in my junk drawer in my kitchen. I'm sure of it.
A handle, and you have to sort of like wrap your hand around it. And after a couple of spins, your probably hand get very fatigued.
Oh yeah, it's raw, right?
And so now if you go into any sort of like store or Target and you look in the kitchen aisle, you're going to see an array of things, and they do not look like that metal can opener, right? And so now you're starting to think about new form factors. And so this was actually about really examining how people should use a can opener, right? Mm-hmm. And it was thinking about the different sort of types of people that might use a can opener, and some people that are older. And so it was really taking the time to study people in context, where they were storing the item, how they're holding it, how they're cleaning it, and sort of looking at that entire thing. And it's funny, it's just around a can opener, but it's really sort of the tenets of good design and good user experience. And so that's where it initially stemmed. And this company was great. It was just a studio in New York City. They still exist, and they do a lot of really world-class product design. But it was everything from kitchen objects to Hewlett-Packard printers, mm-hmm. to automobile interface type of stuff, to medical. And, I remember designing a blood pressure monitor, and it was like when you had physical buttons, nurses had to tap on physical buttons and mm-hmm. all these dials. And the idea was moving to a touchscreen interface, which was like considered impossible at the time, because it's like that's going to cause so much more error, it's going to cause a lot more issues, it's going to be hard to clean. But now if you walk into any doctor's appointment and you see the thing that they roll in, it's all touchscreen. And so
Yep.
these were sort of the early thinking of good user experience.
And just to pause you there, Esther. So is the idea that if you move beyond the straight up utilitarianism, the functionality of, let's say, the can opener, and you make it more beautiful and more attractive, do people get more utility out of it? Do they get more enjoyment out of it? I don't know. Is it more engaging them? I mean, a can opener is kind of a boring device, but I get the point, right? Or is it just you're going to sell more of your can openers versus the next person?
Yeah, I think this like this really stemmed in like the early 80s. There's a guy named Don Norman, and he was a cognitive psychologist and designer. And I think the idea here was that if you design products that actually really take into consideration how a person would like to use them, but beyond utility, it makes it enjoyable, right?
Hmm.
It makes cooking more fun. It potentially makes listening to music more fun. It makes your boring commute into the office a little less tedious. Then that is sort of the outcome that could come from good design.
Okay, and that makes total sense. I'm going to jump ahead, but that has huge implications for engagement and one of the big challenges in the industry from a streaming and user experience perspective. But before we get there, and I'm itching to get there and talk about that, let's finish your career path and how you got to where you are today.
Yeah, so this was early days before there was a real practice of UX UI, but I went to grad school at Carnegie Mellon University. They were starting up a sort of an early program around user experience and really understanding what this discipline was. And
Hmm.
so I spent a couple of years there with some real interesting thought leaders in the field, and was really just thinking about human-centered design and the methodologies. This is when we were starting to think about how do you incorporate qualitative and quantitative research to help determine, how to think about product requirements and how to
Hmm.
think about system design. It's not just about thinking about a mobile interface, but you want to think about what's the full experience. And then it even started to open things around service design, like what's the difference between a physical product you're designing and a service. And if you think about it, there's all these touch points that a consumer might be having to interact with. And so we were really thinking about that. And so then that led me to and initially working at IDEO, which is an innovation consultancy with a broad range of disciplines and
Hmm.
really fun projects. Like at the time, it was, when we were thinking about the future ownership of um, uh, car ownership in China, and working with 3M and sort of experiencing, what that would look like. How do you educate people? How do you sort of have that initial experience? So that was really cool. And then I moved on to another innovation consultancy called Frog Design. And I was there for about 7 years,
Hmm.
working as a creative director. And it was another world-class design innovation firm, really pivotal in my career. I mean, this is definitely before all these companies had in-house design departments, right? Before you had user research, before you had UX UI. Many of these companies relied on consultancies like this. And so,
Is that
you
it
know,
was that because at the time it was considered sort of a dark art, like, okay, let's outsource that to the experts, right? Or it was kind of like, all right, let's get through the project and just get some cool design, form factor, whatever, with a new product or service or whatever. At what point did it kind of click in the industry? No, you got to bring that in-house. That's so integral to the brand and the experience and our engagement with customers.
I think, I hope it wasn't a dark art. I think it just wasn't a sort of ingrained discipline that a lot of corporations had, right? So it's like really, when you think about metrics, you're not really thinking about user satisfaction, right? You're thinking about how to grow a business, or you're thinking about how to scale business. And at that time, that methodology that a lot of these really interesting um, places like IDEO and Frog were doing was like, to really create a scalable and sustainable product or business strategy really stems at thinking about, unmet needs,
Hmm.
pain points, and linking those to product opportunities to make really delightful experiences.
Hmm.
So it was sort of the way in which we worked. And so we really blended business strategy, product design, user research,
Hmm.
and that was sort of the output that would help a lot of these corporations that didn't have enough time or the resources or the skills in-house to have that visioning capability.
Okay. And I think that at some point a lot of companies saw that as integral to their larger company brand. And and having that consistent sort of look and feel. I mean, I think of Apple, everybody thinks of Apple, right? Right. Where their design excellence over the years across all their products was integral to their products. Right. And so just thinking about it in a point way, like, oh, let's launch this service, this product, and then the next one without a consistent sort of brand and experience and design strategy was, and, at some point, I guess they thought the outsourcing model was flawed, right?
Well, I think you start to realize that that's just a good way to think about your business, and
Hmm.
you could operationalizing that goes beyond just consistency of how a product looks, but it
Hmm.
starts to infiltrate an organization, right? You're really stopping to sort of um, think about user needs, whether that's your viewer needs, whether that's your partner needs. There's an range of that, right? And so that starts to help inform how you go about um, concept ideation to
Hmm.
testing, and this notion of like iterate and test. You don't have one perfect thing that you're striving to get, and like it's really dogmatic and all the funds are to get to this one answer, but it's about prototype fast, iterate, learn from it, and
Yep.
continue to do that. And that was one of the big things that I think changed a lot of culture and how organizations were looking at product development.
I also wonder, and you probably tell this in getting to your current role, is at some point you got into bigger and bigger rooms, right? And the idea of design got further and further up to the sort of radar screen of the C-suite, right? It's not just something for some product manager or engineer, in a dark room somewhere, right? It's so central to the overall brand strategy.
Yeah, brand and product strategy, and
Hmm.
again, like sort of how they operate. So, all the clients we dealt with, this was not at the product manager level. It was definitely infiltrating into the C-suite and the topper tiers of executives who are interested in, wait, how can we actually think about this way to run our business?
And do you remember a time, maybe it's in the current role, maybe before that, where you were brought into a room? Like, at what point were you brought into like a C-suite level? And it's like, we need to know what this brand strategy is. We need to know what the design strategy is. How is this going to affect us? Where it wasn't just a stamp, a rubber stamp. It was like, this is a really big decision for the company.
Yeah, so many experiences. I mean, we these were engagements that were multi-year at times, right? So Frog worked with Disney,
Okay.
we worked with Samsung, LG, big healthcare like Kaiser Permanente, and we were partnering with them to sort of understand what are the pain points, not just in your product experience or in your service experience, but what are the challenges that you see in the industry, in the climate, like what are those things? And so we're gathering all those inputs. So those execs are actually brought into the process, right? All the stakeholders are brought into the process. So
So
in
earlier on, it's not like you wait to the final end. It's like, okay, here's our pitch, right?
yeah, it's definitely about sort of integrating and getting the mindset shift to be more user centered in all ways of operating.
Awesome. That's great. All right. So continuing on your path to YouTube TV.
Yeah. So, after working in consulting for many years, I landed at YouTube, and it was an interesting time. This was a little less than 9 years ago. YouTube was growing. Obviously, at that time, it was still a very important video platform, but it was definitely scaling itself. And I think at that time, they were also looking at some of the verticals. The one that I came into was music, and it was
Mhm.
a really interesting time where music was going through disruption, and this is where users were experiencing a lot of different changes, and you're moving into streaming similar to what we see with digital and TV. And so,
Mhm.
in a lot of ways, music was setting the precedent for that, right? And there was a lot of challenges with media partners and sort of what it would mean for them and music labels to move into to digital streaming. And so we were rethinking what that was. And I got to spend a lot of time rethinking what the music experience could be generally and what that could be on YouTube. And we worked on reconceiving and launching a newly designed YouTube music app that is now the number two most downloaded app in the US.
Mhm.
And that experience was thinking about how do we create a really innovative experience for the next wave of music listening and music consumption, and what is that? And
Mhm.
then also think about growing a subscription business, right? This was also really important. And then thinking about how this could scale, right? How a product like this and an ecosystem like this could scale internationally, which was a really exciting thing to work on. And now it's continuing to grow, and it's a great product.
So before we get to your current role, it kind of intrigues me that you went, we talked about, can openers to, more
Yeah.
digital things and music and everything else. Was it easier or harder in a way, designing the user experience for YouTube music and that it's an audible experience. You got to launch it, right? You got to have a good user interface and get them listening. Does video kind of up the stakes because now it's not just subscription, retention, launching some sort of content, but it's actually the content itself and how they're engaging it? Or was it even harder because once you kind of launch, a player for any kind of music, I mean, do you lose control? Is it easier? I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, I think I can't say what's easier or harder. I think what music enabled me to realize, it was way beyond the singular app, right? This is
Okay.
an ecosystem that we are building. And if you think about it, and what a user can go through on YouTube today is they could download a very specific music app that's for a really great lean back experience, right? It's, you can do audio only, and you can sort of consume really great playlists and get amazing personalized recommendations. You can also consume YouTube in a really interesting way on YouTube, on your TV. You can consume on your TV. You could also consume on just when you're watching different types of YouTube creator content. And so thinking about all the touch points in this system was really interesting, and a very interesting parallel to how we think about TV. And then it's an ecosystem for who you're also designing for, because it's not just the end user, but it's thinking about the partners and the content providers, and it's thinking about emerging artists and
Okay.
aspiring artists. And so then you're starting to really build out what that end-to-end
Content
experience.
discovery and new music and everything else like that. So you headed up user experience for YouTube Music for about 4 years,
Mhm.
and then you took over, and you started on the YouTube TV side of things. Tell me about that inflection point. Where were you in your career? How did you get that role? And
Yeah.
how's that kind of grown? Yeah.
For me, I was always, the thing that drives me is being able to take 0 to 1 products and being able to really um, sort of like push from user experience and from a craft level. And there were, and also in a challenging sort of industry landscape. And TV was really interesting at the time because I had spent so much time focused on mobile design, desktop,
Yeah.
tablets. And I saw a huge opportunity for just more and more people being entertained in their living room, right,
Hmm.
on the big screen. And I think I saw a huge opportunity for a lot more of these things that I was starting to innovate on UX to also pioneer what we could do on the big screen, right? So there
Yeah,
was a
and it's
lot of,
interesting too that you're combining sort of a digital experience now with going back to a physical form factor as well. Because now you got the connected TV, you got the remote, and you got to make that all kind of work in unison, right?
that's right. I mean, there's like now many other factors that come into play when you're thinking about the user experience. The remote control is definitely one of them. And it's obviously so much of the waves of what was happening with TV, from starting with your cable experience, and then moving towards the digital streaming of live TV, and then now sort of a fragmented ecosystem where there's an OS that you turn on with multiple different DTC apps. And so, how is a user navigating that? So, I mean, before all this was happening, I was really intrigued by what was going to be happening similar to music, which was this major disruption happening in the
Hmm.
TV industry. There's a huge opportunity to actually create an amazing user experience that actually meets people's needs, and then being able to build up a team and actually grow it to build the future of TV.
Awesome. Well, great. Thank you for that career background. So let's segue into your current role. You mentioned you built up the team. You've been heading up YouTube TV user experience for almost 5 years now. What is your current purview responsibilities? What does your team look like? Any insights about, what does your day look like? What are the challenges and things that you're working on right now?
Yeah, currently I oversee user experience teams. So what does that mean? That means that's designers, that is researchers, and that is content strategists. So everything that we think about in terms of the end-to-end user experience and how we can make it much more easier to use and more delightful to use. So I would say that this is a really amazing multidisciplinary team, and we partner really well with product management and
Hmm.
marketing and our engineers, and so we're all sort of working really closely together. It's less siloed, but it's about really bridging all the functions to think
Hmm.
about the overall user experience. On a typical day, now we're in such a different environment. So some people are working remotely and some people are in the office, but we still run design critiques. This is about sort of pulling up and looking at all different conceptual designs and being able to ask questions and look at different angles of it. And then we'll move into user studies. So we're constantly testing with users, and there's a team that's running this at all times to be able to understand how are people getting through this, where are they getting stuck, what is something that maybe we didn't uncover. We're looking at things that are going out to launch. I'm sitting with my partners and we're ensuring, are we hitting all of our critical user journeys, and are we hitting it at 100% pass rate, or are there issues there that we need to, hey, hold this launch and potentially revisit things that we think could make it much better. And so my goal is to make sure we're thinking about overall quality, the product excellence, but also creating a really culture of critique and
Hmm.
innovation, right? So this is about giving enough space for teams to not only sort of execute, but really think about the future and giving space to be able to have that creativity.
Yeah, it's really interesting, all the teams that have to kind of work together for a really good user experience. And shout out to your alma mater, Carnegie Mellon. My son was looking at business schools a few
Mm.
years ago, and we went there and campus, and I was really struck by like the combination of business, engineering, and tech, and like art, right? And that being one of the leading theater programs in the country. I was just like, wow, what a cool vibe, right? Bringing all those people together. But that's what it takes today, right? To build a great product, a great user experience, a great service.
Yeah, 100%. I think that everything around making a great experience and how we want to operate in the company is that all the functions to me are less and less distinct, but you're starting to see designers that have amazing engineering capabilities, or engineers that have their business hats and they're thinking
Mhm.
about how to maneuver certain things, or partnerships people that have really great sort of ideas for something that we should experiment with. And so more and more this crossover is so critical for us to actually innovate. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes it can fall flat too, right? You can get a little too creative and you're like, oh, let's do this. And it's just like,
Yeah.
that's why you got to be constantly, testing with customers, real customers, and, do the focus groups and all that other fun stuff. So, and you know that very well, right? I'm not gonna like force you to give an example of a bombed product or service because I don't want to embarrass anybody, but we all know it happens. So I've been really focusing on user experience the last few years. We launched the annual user streaming and OTT user experience survey. YouTube TV responded to that. It's all anonymous, so we can't talk about who responded and everything else. But it was really interesting, some of the takeaways from that study. We'll be beginning that again this fall. Usually publish it beginning of the year, so that'll be like January, February timeframe. So, I encourage people to download that from our website, take a look at it. But, one of the things that really jumped out as a huge challenge in the industry, and I'm going to ask for your insights on this, Esther, is fragmentation, right? We all know that consumers have a huge number of content options, a huge number of, sources to get their content, streaming apps and everything. How do you, take that in consideration with your design strategy, with your roadmap? You've got a distinct brand. Obviously, you got a powerful brand, one of the leading, streamers and sort of virtual MVPDs in the industry for sure. But how do you take into account the fact that their customer journey is kind of bouncing around everywhere, right? How do you make them feel at home? Maybe talk to that a little bit.
Sure. Yeah, I think it's definitely, something we hear and see a lot. And I think there's another big pain point that's emerging there that's beyond just the fragmentation. Because typically when you turn on your TV now, most of the times the OS is going to have all the different things that you could pop in and out. But I
Yep.
think what you're seeing is like, where do I find the thing, right? Where do I find that movie? What are the new releases? Do I have the subscription? And so the discovery of even new content has been
Hmm.
really hard. And so that's sort of the emerging challenge that we're experiencing with. It's something that we're thinking about a lot. We launched Primetime channels in 2022, but it was really thinking about sort of the users that come to YouTube. They're coming to watch their favorite content. And that
Hmm.
can be a real range, right? It can be everything from the latest Mr. Beast challenge to,
Hmm.
Taylor Swift's newest hit to
Hmm.
highlights from last night's basketball game. And
Hmm.
so, we see a huge opportunity there that's been really exciting to think about. Being able to aggregate that content in a place that's easy to navigate and easy to find is going to be the thing that we are focused on. And uh,
Okay.
yeah.
So what's the right balance between the user, the viewer, telling you what they're looking for, right? Through tactile input, let's say on the remote or on the keyboard or whatever, or voice, whatever it might be, some sort of input, versus passively using data to kind of guess what they're looking for, right? Because you just mentioned three really distinct examples. One could be traditional YouTube, like video clips from the game last night. The other one is major performance, whatever it might be. How do you figure that out? And I mean, I know we're gonna trip over this at some point, so I'll throw it out there. What role does AI play in helping to navigate that experience?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is. So there's a couple things that you're pulling at. One is, how much do you rely on specific user anecdotes or user feedback to sort of derive on what the ideal solution is versus inferring or sort of like making a leap. And
Yep.
I think that that's sort of the art behind designing great product experiences, right? And so to me, you're blending sort of, data science is really important because you're starting to look at really interesting sets of analysis, but then you're also combining that a lot of times with qualitative research where it's like, let's go in homes and like really
Hmm.
reinvestigate that and sort of it. So I think triangulating all the different points of information that you get, whether it's in product app usage, whether it's user satisfaction surveys, whether it's sort of qualitative research, maybe there's also a quant survey. And to me, that sort of art is in triangulating and interpreting that.
Hmm.
The thing around, how much do you automate? So maybe the idea here was a funny thing that we thought about in music, and it pertains to TV. There used to be a music app called Songza where,
Hmm.
there was very little UI that you had to interact with because it would sort of be able to just help you get right into the best workout thing, and you didn't even have to think about it. And I think the question here is, when it comes to TV, how much do we automate? And I think we have to enable like a spectrum of choice and
Hmm.
also a spectrum when you think about the controls. So when you think about sports fans has been really interesting for us, right? Sports fan is a gamut, right? I think it's such an interesting thing to sort of really explore fandom. And there's everything up to the avid fan, but then everything that you would imagine that's really interesting about a casual fan.
Hmm.
And so being able to design an experience that actually could tune to both of those needs without making one have to sort of jump to the other. I think that that is the thing is we're looking at how do you look at those edge cases, but then
Hmm.
design something that anyone could use and maybe you will flex up or flex down. And so it's the same thing for, personalization. In my opinion, like what we're designing here, the future of TV is that the way we're going to consume TV is going to be very different. The way you should consume TV this evening might be very different from how I consume it. We could be using the same product. And so is there a way that we're designing experiences that with very little effort on behalf of the user, but someone they want, you could get it tailored to what you want, right? So if you
Hmm.
want to connect your fantasy for this Sunday's football game, then maybe you should be able to connect your accounts to Yahoo Fantasy and get that data pulled in, right? And maybe I want to watch multiple games on a screen, so I'm going to have a 4-up on our multi-view, but that will be very different from maybe what you would be watching.
And how important is it to maintain sort of this idea of profile management, right? Understanding different demographics and how they use it. You mentioned the Taylor Swift concert, and last year was a big part of the NFL, right? A lot of fans tuning into NFL games, they didn't really care much about football. It was a drama and there's a romance and getting glimpses of Taylor Swift up in the, in the suite up there. How do you sort of recognize what that demo is? And then do you adjust on the fly to the type of user experience, the sort of the customer journey you're going to take them on, or how does that work?
So, I think it's going to be like what we do on YouTube TV. If you think about sort of a really nice onboarding experience, is that you can input, signals to create that personalized experience, right? So thinking about what teams or leagues that you're interested in, right? And this is a paradigm that many streaming apps have. But then how can you tweak that even throughout your experience? But at the same time, if you're spending a lot more time on certain things, that might come up on your top picks for you shelf.
Mhm.
And then when you go to the live guide, you still like to be able to browse and sort of see what's kind of just airing right now, but you can also have a recommended shelf at the top. So you can see sort of this blend, and that's based on being able to give some controls to users that's really easy and delightful, but also being able to serve up things without having to work for it.
Okay, that's really helpful. So I want to kind of move to the next set of questions, which is really around what's happening in the industry right now. We talked about a few things as it relates to design, the user experience, fragmentation, so on. What do you see as the big trends right now, and where is that kind of lead into the future and how you engage with viewers?
I mean, maybe what, and this was funny, this is something you and I chatted about before, but maybe I'll take it in the angle of like trends that maybe I hope sort of like go away as opposed to like the trends that we have to leap onto.
Okay.
But generally, I think, you're seeing a lot more interfaces where there are shelves of thumbnails that are really hard for people to parse through. So you're not seeing a lot of hierarchy. Um, you're not seeing a lot of it's just sort of the endless scroll. So there's not a lot of
Yeah.
visual distinction. There's a lot of title art. But like, how can we start to sort of think about that? But it's a really hard balance because then you're taking up a lot of screen real estate. And so I think it's this notion of being really dynamic and again, allowing users some control in that interface. Um, a thing that I'm really excited about is that, when you think about playback and you're in a player, why does that have to be one size fits all, right? So
Good
that is
point.
also going to be very different, based on what type of fan you are, or what type of usage that you're coming in for. And so, what we're launching, we're excited because Sunday Ticket is in full effect. I hope you are watching the games on Sunday. But in addition to giving users more choice, so we know that users really love multi-view, but now they can actually, pick from a great set of multi-views to be able to add a little bit more control into that. And then what you'll also start to see is on the player, you can actually get a side panel with different ways to get additional things, whether it's your fantasy or being able to see scores. And so this is allowing you now to not have a one size fits all approach and
Yeah.
enabling viewers to, again, get that TV that's really made for them.
So I want to get your perspective on FAST, free ad-supported TV and streaming. Obviously it's not going away. It's a big trend. So I'm not talking about the business model. Advertising pays the bills for a lot of companies in the industry right now. But more the user experience, right? One of the benefits of FAST, at least early on, was it was familiar. It looked like linear, kind of scrolled left to right. You can kind of see, a temporal grid and kind of get your bearings or whatever. And then there's sort of hybrid models that might lead, FAST to VOD, where you can kind of like launch into your library and, pick titles from there. Do you see that running out of steam from a user experience perspective or evolving into something new and different? Or is that just like the table stakes that's comfortable for a large percentage of viewers and then it's just going to kind of that has legs into the future? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think, for me, like regardless of transaction nature, we aim for a really consistent and seamless experience, regardless of if it's fast or SVOD.
Yep.
I want a viewer to be able to come to YouTube and be able to navigate that, knowing that they're looking for an amazing entertainment experience.
Okay.
So the way in which that's presented, in some ways, the cohesion there is really critical for us, and we're really looking across all the user journeys to just help figure out how can we make discovering new content, jumping back into content that you were previously watching, potentially saving much easier, and trying to think about that across all the different sort of business lines.
Yeah, I always wonder. I know there's some companies that allow you to customize, sometimes quite radically, the actual user interface, depending on like you can toggle. I want this kind of more linear approach, more VOD approach, more whatever, tile based, whatever. Is that a potential solution of the future, or is that just gonna, make things more confusing for viewers?
It's a hard one. I think that anytime you offer, a widgets to sort of tailor your screen, it already feels like too much work.
Yeah.
And so again, I think it's about sort of leveraging the notion of implicit and explicit signals to be able to really deliver the most simplest experience and then allowing people to tune up or tune down.
Okay.
And so again, with like a player, if you just want lean back and do not give me any of the additional things, I just want a sort of pure one screen lean back experience, you should be able to do that. But maybe with a simple tap of your remote, you'll also be able to see a side panel that pops in. And with that, you could easily see an overview screen, or you can go through tabs to be able to get to more and more depth.
Okay, that's helpful. Yeah, and I think that's the reason your team is doing what your team does, right? You want to start a baseline that's familiar, using the state of the art and using, science and sort of, an artistic view of things to provide a great experience. So we're almost out of time, Esther. And one of the things we'd love to do on this podcast is sort of personalize some of the, luminaries in the industry, people like yourself, and kind of get to know you a little bit better. Can you share with our audience any kind of personal hobby or interest that, outside of work maybe that you like to spend some time on?
Yeah, I mean, I love doing what I do every day. It's fast paced and we're moving at all times. And sometimes I just need a pure creative outlet. So I paint. I just go to old school analog canvas and oil.
Nice. Oil. Okay, great.
And it is really refreshing for me to sort of get off the screen, and get off all the different things that I use for technology, and then just go to the most basics of when you think about paint, you're not even thinking about how the actual thing looks. You're thinking about tone and value, and it's really freeing.
Okay, and is that abstracts? Are you doing portraits? Are you doing kind of like, landscapes? Like what is your favorite subject matter or anything?
It mixes a lot. I
Mhm.
definitely veer towards people and just different. I use photographs a lot, and just a snapshot. But for me, more and more, I am like, I've been doing this for over 20 years. Like having an outlet is so important, right? And being able to use that to sort of invigorate you to come to work with fresh ideas or inspire the team in different ways has been really cool.
Yeah, it's funny. When I was a kid, somehow, I don't know, I must have drawn like a stick figure of a dog or something, and my parents thought I was going to be an artist, right? So for like 3 years after that, every Christmas and birthday, I got art supplies, right? And they actually sent me to one of those Bob Ross painting
Yeah.
classes, where you could do like the happy little trees and the mountain scene and everything else like that. And I did okay, but they're teaching you
Yeah.
techniques just to kind of like copy and like look decent. So I was like, oh my, see, he's an artist. I'm not an artist. I took one of those those tests in college. I was supposed to be a mechanical engineer of all things, but definitely not an artist.
Okay. Maybe you got to pick it up. You might have something there.
I mean, maybe I'm good at synthesizing inputs from artists and engineers and kind of putting things together. So, but yeah, I mean, I still probably have tubes of oil paint somewhere around here, but they're probably all dried up at this point. Anyhow, Esther, it's been a pleasure. I really enjoyed getting to know you even better. We met up in June, and you've done fantastic things at YouTube TV. Constantly innovating. Keep an eye out on anything in the future, and yeah, thanks so much for your time today, Esther.
Yeah. Thanks, Brian. This is fun.
Awesome. Well, listen, everybody, once again, this is Brian Mahoney, the CEO of Trend Research, president of the OTT executive community, on behalf of OTT Executive Podcast, and Esther on signing off. Thank you, everybody. Have a great day.